Natalie Winters, co-host of Bannon's War Room, and also White House correspondent. Welcome, Natalie. How are you?
Hi, good. Thank you so much for having me.
It is great to have you. Thank you for all of the hard work on so many stories, but this one in particular is really disturbing because it shows that this is nothing but the same revolutionaries, and this time they are pushing into the zone of terrorism.
Exactly, and I think the most concerning thing here is that it sort of proves, I think, our worst caricature of the Democratic Party, which is that for the last 4 years, they used tools like censorship, lawfare, overregulation, political persecution to go after not their enemies, but people who disagreed with them. And now that they've effectively been shut out, right, of those institutional and government levers of power, right, they can't impeach President Trump. So what are they doing? I guess what Marxists always do, not just show an irreverence for private property and try to destroy Teslas, but they're using violence and intimidation. And I think the way that the left has tried to depict these actions as, organic civil society, just, speaking about democracy and democratic values, there's nothing civil about this. Like you said, it's terrorism. And frankly, there's nothing societal. These people are being funded by far left donors like George Soros, like the Tides Foundation, the same big money, dark money interests that funded basically every violent protest we've seen since Trump really entered the stage.
Yeah, literally the oligarchs that they say that Elon Musk is.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. So tell me about some of the people that are behind this.
Sure. So Indivisible is sort of the ringleader of a lot of this. And their biggest refrain that they always are pumping through the airwaves is that they are a grassroots organization, that they're people-funded and people-powered. But if you dig into their financials, which, as you alluded to, they've essentially erased all of their web pages showing the personnel that's undergirding their movement. But from the sort of 990 filings where you can see, again, by design, not exactly who's funding them, but overwhelmingly, the majority of the funds that support this group come from big dark money type foundations or philanthropic organizations, the NGO of the world, which obviously is a euphemism. But of that, the majority of it comes from, and I'm talking $7+ million since 2018 alone, is coming from George Soros's Open Society Foundation. And like I said, when they tell you that they're funded by people and it's people power, it's not true. And in some cases, most recently, they were doing a whole thing, I'm sure your audience has seen, this apoplectic narrative that, House Republicans are not showing up to town halls. Well, Indivisible was behind that, and they were actually reimbursing their groups, in some cases $200, to buy all the gear, all the protests that they needed for that. And they have a separate program where they'll reimburse groups up to $1,500 for get out the vote operations, advocacy, and recruitment. So the idea that this is all organic and that President Trump is just, angering America so bad by going after waste, fraud, and abuse, it's not true. It's the same people who funded the protests outside the DNC, the flag burners, and frankly, it's the same people who fund inside the DNC.
A lot of people don't know that I'm a painter, and I gave up painting because of demoralizing pain in my hands. I was losing hope. If pain keeps you from really living, I urge you to do what I did. Try Relief Factor. Relief Factor is a 100% drug-free supplement developed by doctors. It's safe to take every day, and it has helped me and so many others. You can try their 3-week quick start right now, $19.95 at relieffactor.com. How do we reverse this? I just saw let me see if I can pull it up here. There's a new poll out that shows from Rasmussen, are the attacks on Tesla and Tesla vehicles justified? 19% of Americans said yes. Among the respondents ages 18 to 34, that was 36% that said they are justified. Among respondents that are Democrats, 31% say they are justified. When asked, is it fair to call the attacks on Tesla and Tesla vehicles a form of domestic terrorism? Overall, only 46% say yes, 39% say no, 15% say, I'm too dumb to have an opinion. Among the respondents who say they're Republicans, 68% said yes. The respondents who say that they're Democrats, 56% say no. How do you keep people saying, and a growing number of people saying, no, it's totally cool to shoot that guy in front of a hotel because he works for an insurance company, and we can burn down the Teslas, and we can find people in our own neighborhood that have them, target them, and destroy their lives until they take a stand with us and say they believe what we're doing and they've sold their Tesla. How do you get so many Americans to get behind that?
I think that there's two key things that the Trump administration could do to push back on that. First and foremost, I think would be revoking the tax-exempt statuses of a lot of these organizations that are organizing these protests, because they're essentially all 501c3s, which is absolutely insane. And I think they need to continue pressing ahead on the verticals of the Act Blue investigations, and just in general, the dark money funding. But also a lot of the funding for groups, for example, there's a new thing called the Resistance Lab, which is being spearheaded by Representative Pramila Jayapal in conjunction with the Harvard Ash Center, which is hosted at the rather prestigious Kennedy School. And though they have similarly deleted their web pages, some of their top funders are none other than USAID and the Department of State. And the lady who runs it, who uses they, them pronouns, so make your own judgment there, but she herself has been funded extensively by USAID, the United States Institute of Peace. And I think it's really important to drill down on this figure, because this is someone who's not studying protest and nonviolence. This is someone who their CV reads like a rap sheet. They're studying terrorism and violent versus nonviolent protests, not because violent protests are immoral or unethical, but because they think at this moment nonviolent protests are more effective in bringing out their sort of utopian democratic worldview. And I use democracy not in its true sense. But these people are extremely, extremely radical. And I think what it goes back to is what we sort of started this interview on. They have always used this sort of color revolution paradigm to institute change and to oppose President Trump. It's why they depict him as an autocrat, as an authoritarian, right? Because then they can justify their outside the system regime change tactics that they've used abroad. And since they usually rely on impeachment proceedings or contested election results, they can't do that, right? They didn't take the House, and President Trump won the popular vote overwhelmingly. So they're relying on this narrative that what he's doing is so unpopular, and this sort of astroturfed outrage and protest and intimidation tactics to really continue this myth that President Trump is a dictator that must be opposed at all costs.
I agree with you that Trump needs to go after the 501c3s. I mean, I'm a little disappointed in Pam Bondi. However, I say that realizing that she still doesn't really even have her full team around her. It's taking so long. But I'm hoping that the Justice Department starts to move a little quicker on things, because this is clearly terrorism. It is clearly these organizations that, as you said, have been taking money from the taxpayer to do all of these things. And the only way to stop them, I think, is to not just call them out, but if they're breaking any kind of law, which they clearly are, go after them with everything we have.
Yeah, and I think these radical judges have been stepping into at every point. I think that's a continuation of the lawfare. And I think the fundamental issue, look, you had all these Republicans talking tough about how they're such fiscal hawks. Where were they on the USAID front, all this waste, fraud, and that's been uncovered for decades? They did absolutely nothing. And now the best we can get is a not even full committee hearing, but a subcommittee hearing that's been postponed on judges with some experts to tell us and confirm what we know, that these people are radical partisan activists. It's so unfortunate, because our side, our grassroots, are fueled by patriotism, not dark money, not George Soros money. And they're such amazing investigative reporters. You go on X nowadays, people are the ones who are exposing these groups, and the elected Republicans that should be enforcing. We're not even telling them to go after these groups in an autocratic, despotic way. We're just saying enforce the laws, enforce the fact that these should not be receiving tax-exempt statuses or 501c3 statuses, or go after the left-wing billionaires. I mean, the case that they've been able to make against right-wing billionaires who are trying to root out waste, fraud, and abuse, when you juxtapose that to actual, I would argue, criminal cases that you could bring against a ton of left-wing billionaires who are clandestinely and covertly funding domestic terror operations here in the United States, not just since January 20th, but for years on end. The issue, I think, starts with the weak fecklessness of congressional Republicans who just have continually showed that they're unwilling to do anything.
When is Trump going after them? I would love Trump to give a speech today on a few things. One, okay, I just did the tariffs. The tariffs are not going to work by themselves. I need actual tax reform, tax cuts, and a tax cut is not renewing the Trump taxes that are going to, be raised. Now, that's not a tax cut. That was a tax cut 8 years ago. Give us a significant tax cut, Congress, and also I'm taking a hatchet to the regulations beginning right now. And anybody who wants to stand around with their hands in the pocket, that's fine. But we cannot stand around and wait. The time is too short to stand around and wait. I'm looking for him to start really pushing, eyes into people's heads just a little bit, saying, excuse me, pressure is on me. The pressure is on the population of the United States. Do your damn job, Congress, right now.
Well, and it's quite interesting, right, because you hear President Trump get criticized for flooding the zone. They say it so pejoratively. But flooding the zone is just a response to the absolute disarray and chaos that President Biden left this country in. We have to flood the zone with executive orders and action after action and tariff after tariff because of what happened in Afghanistan at the southern border across this country with Chinese spy balloons, right? It's such a double standard. And congressional Republicans, the same people who were joining the DOGE caucus and posting all their pictures and talking a tough game on Twitter, they're voting to continue spending levels at the very same Biden rate levels. And the Senate's already moving to try to make it so President Trump can't unilaterally impose tariffs. You know what? It's the Senate, it's the people who've been there for probably longer than I've been alive, who allowed the Chinese Communist Party, who allowed these third world countries to overtake our manufacturing jobs, to seize essentially our means of production. And they did nothing about it because their donors, the people who've been funding them, got rich off of it and enjoy it. And their constituents, the people who knocked the doors for them, donated them small dollar amounts. They have nothing but contempt for them. And you can see it on display. And frankly, it's insulting to the intelligence of your audience, of Bannon's War Room audience, when they think that just some tweet or some strongly worded letter or some, half-hearted hearing against a judge that has no really enforcement power is going to be enough to satisfy us. The MAGA movement is about shifting the goalposts for accountability. And I think our audiences have been very clear that it's found in prison sentences and investigations for people who have committed crimes and not just strongly worded letters or, Fox News segments where people are going off and giving nice, spicy rants, but these criminals keep getting away with it.
Yep. Natalie, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you for all the hard work you do. Sincerely, thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
You bet. That's Natalie Winters, White House correspondent and also co-host of Steve Bannon's War Room.